Today's sponsor is Blue Chew, and they're giving you your first shipment totally free. All you have to do is pay $5 for shipping. Go to bluechew.com, use promo code DAVID. I've put the link right underneath this video. I told you just 2 days ago that coronavirus is continuing to ravage, in particular, some parts of the country. But meanwhile, confusingly, the country is opening more and more, particularly the parts of the country that are having the case and death problems. We have a planned Tulsa, Oklahoma Trump rally with thousands of people on Saturday. Dr. Anthony Fauci has already recommended against going to such a rally. Rallygoers, in fact, have to sign a waiver for coronavirus contagion if they want tickets to this Donald Trump rally. But we now have several more days of data, and the coronavirus pandemic in some particular states is spiking so quickly and so aggressively that the numbers almost seem fake, but they are not fake. And what I mean is, when you look at these case graphs that I'm going to show you, we are more than 3 months into this pandemic. It's hard to believe that some states are managing the pandemic so poorly that we are now getting these spikes. Like, these states are nowhere near the peaks that some states reached in early to mid-April. Looking at Texas, for example, I already told you days ago that cases were spiking in Texas. That was nothing compared to what we are now seeing. A record 4,000 cases in one day in Texas yesterday. These are unconscionable numbers. Sticking with this part of the country, Arizona is quickly becoming the hotspot in terms of case growth rate in the United States, also with a record 2,400 cases yesterday. When you look at these charts, they're downright dystopian. Spoke to a friend in Arizona again. Everybody's just acting like nothing's going on, he says. Stores are open, people packed together, nobody's wearing masks, just like almost no mitigation going on at all. Florida, very similar curve. Have a lot of friends in Florida, very worried. And again, yesterday, the worst day in Florida since all of this started. Also, thousands of new cases. So I really need people to understand the context here. We're months into this. White House coronavirus task force in place for months. Mitigation, testing, PPE, stay-at-home orders, wear masks indoor, months and months and months. And yesterday was the worst day since the start of this in Texas, Florida, and Arizona. Now, it's not just red states. As I've mentioned, California, which was an early hotspot, is still having problems. They've not exactly flattened the curve, but even the growth rates in California are not the erratic numbers that we are seeing in some other places. Now, meanwhile, I continue to be really glad that things are going well in some places. I'm not saying this to brag. It's just luck that, I guess it's not luck. I live in Massachusetts. Obviously, partially I live here because my family moved here. Partially I live in Massachusetts because I prefer the politics of Massachusetts to those of some of these other states. The case curve here just falling off a cliff if you're watching. Connecticut doing really well. Lots of states are doing very well. And we'll see as they start to open whether that changes. So the point here is mitigation works. The cases and the deaths respond to what people are actually doing. The weather does not seem to be stopping the spread in warmer states and as the summer comes. And the Trump administration is just pretending that it's over. Things are actually so bad right now in some states that this conversation about wave 2 is essentially irrelevant in the sense that there's not going to be a dip. It seems as though, we had this idea wave 1 would be dying off by late April, early May. We might have almost no new cases by June 1st. There were models that said by June 1, there will be almost no new cases. We've got 20,000 new cases a day. In some of these states, there won't be a wave 2 because wave 1 will never end. Wave 2 was supposed to start, maybe September, mid-September. We're now looking at least in some states that have not even hit their peaks, just a continued sustained pandemic through the end of the year if nothing changes. The way Texas is looking, Florida, Arizona, it's very difficult to imagine with cases spiking to where they are now that there actually will be a dip that we could call a pause between waves. We could just have a 6 or 8 or 9 month wave until hopefully there is an effective treatment and a vaccine. And half the country seems to be pretending that everything is fine. Now, in terms of, what's safe in different places, I posted a picture of myself in Massachusetts over the weekend, sitting outdoors at a cafe. It felt safe. Given the numbers here, we're down to only, 100. We had only 58 new cases a couple days ago, about 150 a day, under 200 people now left in the ICU in the entire state. I ordered online. I grabbed my coffee and bagel, didn't, interact with anybody, sat outside at a table, nobody around me. When I leave, I flip a piece of paper on the table that goes from green to red, so other people know not to sit there. Wait staff come over and clean it. It seems safe. I mean, the outdoor contagion is primarily when people are doing obviously stupid things, crowding together at a hiking trail or something like that. It seems like that is relatively safe. What we're seeing in other states where it's indoors, no masks, people on top of each other, of course that's going to lead to spread. So, we talk about the 80-20 rule. We talk about 80% of people are incompetent at whatever they're doing. Most of the rules about even outdoors, you should look at wearing a mask. We only need to be doing that because of the small portion of people that are just doing stupid things unless you tell them wear a mask outdoors. And that is something that we can't ignore when we look at state leadership on down. That's a big part of why some of these states are having such major problems. I have some absolutely stunning and incredibly disturbing video to play for you today. We've seen examples of just about everything from the protests of the last couple of weeks, but today it actually pains me to bring you this video of police in Bethel, Ohio, almost being more part of the mob than the peacekeepers. So I'm going to be playing some video for you of a young man who was protesting on behalf of the anti-police brutality movement. Whether we say this was a Black Lives Matter protester or not doesn't really matter. This was a young white male that you're going to see. And in the video, this man is at one point surrounded by right-wing counter-protesters, I guess we would call them, who seemed very unhappy with him. And at a certain point, you also see two police officers drift in, and they're standing right around this guy, including one police officer right in front of the camera. A middle-aged white man with an American flag bandana comes up behind this protester, winds up, and punches the guy in the back of the head right in front of police officers. The police watch and do nothing to the perpetrator, who violently attacked this man. When the young man who was assaulted by the counter-protester says to the officer, "I was just assaulted. What are you going to do?" The officer does nothing. Let's look at the video. Apologies for those just listening today. I've done my best to describe what we are going to hear and see. The audio doesn't tell the whole story, so I encourage you to find the clip online. For our video audience, let's take a look.
Don't touch him, okay? Yeah, man, all right. Hey, here's your hat, motherfucker. Shove that in your ass, you little bitch.
Sir, I just got punched in the back of the
Get
head.
out motherfucker. You better get him going back there. Take care of that. We can take a return from you.
Hey, okay, where am I allowed to demonstrate?
Cincinnati.
This has to be dealt with. I don't know the identity of the two officers in question here. I don't know the identity of the perpetrator, but certainly with this video spreading virally and the evidence plain as day on the video, they should be able to be identified. So what we need to do is actually contact the Bethel, Ohio Police Department, the chief of police. All this information is public, okay? So I'm not doxing anybody. The chief of police is Steve Teague, whose email, which is public, is S as in Steve, Teague, Teague, at Bethel-OH.gov, Bethel-OH.gov. The phone number for the Bethel Village Police Department is 513-734-2256. We should be respectful, but we should be asking, number one, that the attacker be identified and arrested, and number two, that these two officers actually be held to account for doing absolutely nothing as a crime was committed in front of them. They must be held accountable. There are multiple perpetrators here. Now, more generally, what's been going on in Bethel, Ohio has been sick. If you take a look at news reports from the protests and counter protests in Bethel, the anti-Black Lives Matter protesters have been hurling racial slurs at protesters, intimidating them. In one video, which I won't play today, a female counter protester approaches a black protester and repeatedly calls her the N-word per WCPO, local news. In another video, a counter protester approaches a protester who is white and uses anti-black racial slurs anyway and asks, why are you even here? You are white. So horrible stuff going on in Bethel. We should contact the police department. We should demand both that the perpetrator be identified and held to account, but also the police who did absolutely nothing. And if you've been experiencing this type of thing, if you've seen this where you live, let me know on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. And remember that you can get the David Pakman Show audio podcast for free every day on whatever your favorite podcasting platform is, be it iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, wherever you want. Get the daily audio podcast for the long form version of the show. We'll take a quick break. Much more is coming up today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
This episode was sponsored by Blue Chew, giving my viewers their first shipment totally free when you go to bluechew.com and use promo code DAVID. It's just a reality that many men, regardless of age, can sometimes benefit from a boost in confidence, a little bit of performance help. Blue Chew is the first chewable tablet with the same FDA-approved ingredients as Viagra and Cialis. Blue Chew being a chewable tablet means it starts working twice as fast as a pill. It's prescribed online. You spend a couple minutes with a short questionnaire. A licensed doctor reviews the information, decides if a prescription is right for you. It's then shipped directly to your home in discreet packaging, no awkward visits to the doctor's office or pharmacy. Plus, it's also cheaper than getting it at a pharmacy. When you go to bluechew.com and use promo code DAVID, you will get your first shipment completely free. Just pay $5 shipping. That's promo code DAVID to get your first shipment of Blue Chew completely free. And I've put the link right underneath this video.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new members of the day at joinpakman.com are Rusty Long and Heather Collins. Thanks to both of you. Of course, membership, it's the primary way we're funded. We would not exist were it not for great people like Rusty and Heather getting memberships. Also, a big thank you to Marlene Solgruber, who is today's longtime sustainer of the day. Marlene's been a member for almost 5 years. Unbelievable. Grab a membership at joinpakman.com. One of the great member benefits, just one, is the daily bonus show. There's an extra show every day where I'm joined by producer Pat for more news and analysis. Joinpakman.com is the place to sign up. Okay, I have something truly special for you today. I'm going to play a 3-minute clip of Mike Pence speaking. Now, please don't tune out. Don't turn this. I know that that's disgusting, but there's a reason for this. Normally, I don't play 3-minute clips on the show. Normally, we cut them up. I play a little segment. I analyze it, so on and so forth. Playing the full 3 minutes here is critical to understanding the anatomy of not answering a question. Mike Pence, vice president, was interviewed on Fox and Friends yesterday morning, and Brian Kilmeade asks a very straightforward question. The question Brian asked is it harder for someone who is black to make it in the United States today in 2020? Very straightforward question. Mike Pence talked for 3 minutes, but said absolutely nothing that could count as an answer. So let's just watch. It's 3 minutes. Sit through it. I apologize, but pay close attention to what Mike Pence says, because you will notice that he actually doesn't say anything about the question that he was asked.
For someone who's black to make it in this country, whether they're a man or a woman, do you think it's harder for them to make it in this country in 2020?
Well, Brian, I love your question because I saw where Joe Biden last night actually tweeted that everybody ought to have a fair shot at the American dream. And it's one of the reasons why, as the president and I were talking, as the president spoke in Dallas last week, he's made it clear that while we're going to take a step today to provide new resources to law enforcement, to help them, embrace higher standards on de-escalation and the use of force, and establish an information sharing. I mean, as I said, nobody hates bad cops more than good cops, and most of the men and women who put on the uniform of law enforcement every day are really the best of us. We know that. So we're going to take these steps today to help improve policing, to help to move that process forward as a country in the wake of these tragic events and the violence that ensued. But we're not going to stop there, Brian. I mean, Biden says everybody ought to have a fair shot at the American dream. Well, we would say, well, why don't you support allowing African American families to choose where their kids go to school? I mean, this president has actually stood strong for school choice. We've doubled the educational choice program here in our nation's capital. And we really do believe that you shouldn't be denied the ability to choose where your kids go to school just because of your zip code or because of your income. We also, as you said, under this president's policies, we had the lowest unemployment level ever recorded for African Americans. We worked with Senator Tim Scott to enact opportunity zones. Now there's more than 4,000 opportunity zones that have attracted $100 billion of investment into our cities. We're going to continue to drive forward on jobs and opportunity. I mean, we understand the media narrative around this time and the negativity around this time, but as I sat down with African American leaders in Pittsburgh, in Maryland, as the president welcomed leaders here to the White House and in Dallas, I think millions of African Americans saw the progress that we were making over the last 3 years, and they know as we bring this economy back in the wake of not just these tragic events and the violence that ensued, but in the wake, of course, of this coronavirus pandemic, that it's President Donald Trump who has the prescription for more prosperity, more educational opportunity, and really more access to the American dream than 50 years of Democrat leadership under the likes of Joe Biden has ever given them.
Okay, so to remind you what the question was, because you might have forgotten while Mike Pence was rambling, the question was, is it harder for black people to make it in the United States today? It's really a question that goes to systemic racism, not about individuals, but about systems. And Mike Pence doesn't even come close to even talking about it. Mike Pence's answer was to criticize Joe Biden, to talk about giving law enforcement more resources, to talk about good cops dislike bad cops, to remind us that most cops are good. He brought up this tired school choice talking point, which we'll get to later. Pence mentions we had low black unemployment and he worked with a black guy named Tim Scott. I'm going to come back to that. The media is being very negative, he said. I've spoken to black people. Trump knows how to bring prosperity to people, and Democrats are bad. So Mike Pence said 10 different things during those 3 minutes, none of which are answers to the question. So now let's go back briefly to black unemployment. Unemployment was really low before the virus. Remember how during Barack Obama's presidency, Republicans insisted there are more people than ever not working in the United States. And then the day Donald Trump became president, the same Republicans were saying, we have more people than ever working in the United States. The explanation for that talking point was, or is, the population keeps growing. So at most times, it is true that we have more people working than ever before and more people not working than ever before. Similarly, with this low black unemployment talking point that Trump and Pence love to use, when unemployment is low, it's generally low for all groups. Again, unless some group is particularly unaffected by things going well overall. There was nothing special that Donald Trump did for Black Americans that would lower their unemployment rate relative to other groups. Unemployment was just low for everybody until coronavirus hit. So now we get to the real question Brian Kilmeade asked, which is an interesting question. Is it tougher to make it if you are Black in the United States? For me, the clearest way to think about this is, would I want to switch to being Black or brown right now? Would I be better off? Would I have been better off growing up if I had been Black or brown? And the answer is, of course not. Of course not. Because I know that if I were Black or brown, I would be treated differently and I would not be better off today. We all know it. In fact, I don't even have to think about the hypothetical of being Black. I can think about something much more tangible. I'm an immigrant from Argentina. I learned English when I was 5, moved to the United States. I have very white skin. If I and my parents moved to the U.S., not as white Hispanic folks, but as brown Hispanic folks, I think would be the way to say it, I would have been treated differently from the moment we got here. My parents would have been treated differently from the moment that we got here. And despite having made big progress when it comes to race in the United States, and we have, I don't deny that, I know that we would have been worse off. Now, by the way, I don't often hear people on the left say this. The United States is definitely less racist than many other countries. I've been to a lot of places in the world, and lots of them are more racist than the United States. Often these are places that are much more homogenous and less diverse than the United States. The U.S. is not, as far as I'm concerned, the most racist country. That's not actually at issue here. The point is, we have the resources to do way better, and we still have major problems with race. And the answer to Brian Kilmeade's question to Mike Pence is, of course it's tougher to make it in the United States in 2020 if you are Black or brown. That still is the case. And Mike Pence managing to spit out 3 minutes worth of words while saying nothing at all about what he was asked about. The version of Donald Trump that I call Downer Trump showed up yesterday in the Rose Garden to sign an executive order about police departments, directing police departments to stop using chokeholds. And Donald Trump did look very, very unwell. And he said things that made no sense whatsoever. So this again raised questions about whether Donald Trump is suffering the side effects of some illness, side effects of medication, cognitive decline, something else that we can't seem to put a finger on. We discussed yesterday on the bonus show extensively the question of police using chokeholds and the reality that the priority should be, rather than a list of tactics that police can and can't use, the focus should be on training officers to de-escalate situations so that chokeholds aren't even in the picture. But we talked about that yesterday. Right now, I want to focus on the absolute implosion of Donald Trump during this Rose Garden statement. Here is Donald Trump saying that we have developed a vaccine for AIDS. Now, that's not true. We have not developed a vaccine for AIDS. And Trump, when he says it, gets that look on his face where he seems to understand that he said something wrong, but he almost is lost and doesn't know what he said. It was like that time where he did the oranges of the investigation thing, and he kind of tries to back it up and mumbles a few things. Take a look at this.
They have come up with things, and they've come up with many other cures and therapeutics over the years. These are the people, the best, the smartest, the most brilliant anywhere. And they've come up with the AIDS vaccine. They've come up with, or the AIDS, and as you know, there's various things, and now various companies are involved. But the therapeutic for AIDS was a death sentence, and now people live a life with a pill. It's an incredible thing. The Ebola vaccine.
So that same confusion happened when Trump repeatedly said he wanted to find out the oranges, the citrus fruit of an investigation. He said it twice, and he had a look where he knew he was saying something that didn't make sense, but he almost couldn't even parse it in his own mind. It didn't get any better. During this same event, Donald Trump seemed to lose his train of thought. This is another pattern we've seen where he forgets what he's talking about. He will just look at someone and say, right? You know what I'm talking about, don't you? We've seen this before. This time he looks into the audience and he says, right, Tim, we're going to pursue things very strongly. You can tell if you're watching that Trump doesn't seem lucid when you look at his face right when this is happening. Take a look.
And I gave a commitment to all of those families today with Senator Tim Scott and Attorney General Bill Barr. We are going to pursue what we said. We will be pursuing it, and we will be pursuing it strongly, Tim, right? Okay.
Wacky stuff. At another moment, Donald Trump was talking about putting down the protesters by using the National Guard. And of course, putting down is certainly not the most humane language to use. Trump bragging about how strongly the protesters were handled.
And your federal government is ready, willing, and able to help, as we did in Minneapolis after it got out of control for 4 days. We sent in representatives, commonly known as the National Guard, and it was all put down very quickly. We're willing to help. We're willing to help in Seattle. We're willing to help anywhere you want.
So when there are protests against police brutality and your response is to brag about how much force you directed be used against the protesters, something is not quite getting through. Then Donald Trump absolutely bizarrely interjecting a complete non sequitur about school choice being the civil rights issue of our time. Take a look at this.
We're fighting for school choice, which really is the civil rights of all time in this country. Frankly, school choice is the civil rights statement of the year.
So understand that when Republicans talk about school choice, what they really mean is defund public schools, weaken public schools, often with voucher programs, which go to charter schools, which then continues the vicious cycle of worsening public schools because you've just pulled money from them. This is a favorite of Republicans. Say public education is bad. Of course, it's underfunded. Use that to justify taking more money out of public education, which makes it worse, so that then they can again justify, look at how bad public education is. We've got to do more charter schools and private schools. It's an old trope from Republicans. And then lastly here, another one of these moments where Donald Trump lists different races and ethnicities and incorrectly claims that almost everybody had a high-paying job before the coronavirus hit.
That's for almost every group, including Black, Hispanic, Asian, women, young people, old people, young people without a high school diploma. Every group. Everybody was thrilled. Everybody had just about high-paying jobs. Our country was never in a better position, and we were planning on massive growth. It was happening. It was already there.
So one of the things we've seen in terms of job creation before coronavirus hit was that while the jobs numbers were good, and I have no problem admitting that, a lot of the jobs being created were what we call BS jobs, not medium or high wage jobs, but low wage jobs, or sometimes jobs that aren't even really jobs. They're contractor positions. And this is a common deception that we are hearing from the right. So there it is, a combination of Donald Trump looking and sounding confused, making verifiably false claims, and the mood in the audience, a combination of quiet confusion, horror, but also blind loyalty, the people that see this and at least tell themselves that everything is completely fine. So we're going to be following up on this on our Instagram page. If you're not following the show on Instagram, please do, at David Pakman Show. And in fact, this is getting so bad that it has gone onto Fox News talking about the Trump health situation, a Republican group now targeting Trump around health concerns. So this is important that it is broken past just certain areas, and even elements of the right are now talking about Trump's health and being put in a position to have to defend it. We'll get to that after the interview today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on your support, and the easiest way is through membership, which includes the world-famous bonus show, as well as commercial-free audio and video streams of the show just for members. Sign up today at joinpakman.com. Coupon code saves you 40%. Vote soon 18.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It is great to welcome John Perkins back to the program. He's an activist and also author of the classic book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. More recently, the author of Touching the Jaguar, which is available now. John, great to have you back.
It's wonderful to be with you again, David. Thank you. I love your show. You do great stuff, so I appreciate being on your show. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, listen, I wanted, there's so many things I want to ask you about. One is, from your perspective, if coronavirus has served as a sort of way to test the economic system that we have, which you know so much about and have critiqued in so many interesting ways over the years, what has coronavirus exposed about the underlying reality of our economic system?
Well, to answer that, I just a little story here that a number of years ago, I took a group of people, I take people to the shamans of Latin America on trips, and we were with a lady shaman high in the Andes of Ecuador, a Quechua-speaking shaman with a wonderful name of Maria Juana, Maria Juana Yamberla. And I was translating. Someone asked, "Hey, Maria Juana, how do we save the earth?" And she laughed and she said, the earth isn't in danger, but we are. And a bunch of other species we take with us. And then she pointed up at this huge sacred volcano that lives near her house, that hovers over her house, hovers over her house called Imbabura. And she said, a few years ago, 20 years ago, that volcano was covered with a massive ice cap. It isn't anymore. Mother Earth is twitching. We're like so many fleas. If we get to be too much of a nuisance, she'll just shake us all off. And she's twitching now. She's showing us the glaciers are melting. And I thought, David, over the years, every time there's been a major hurricane or fires in Australia and California or whatever, these once in 100-year events that happened every year or so now, I remembered what Maria Juana said. But that they've been sending us a message that this death economy doesn't work. We've got to create a new system. But we've taken that as a local thing. So if I survive a hurricane, I expect the outside world to come to help me, bring water, food, etc. The coronavirus has taught us that there is no outside world. This is global. Everybody on the planet is being impacted. And we're seeing, that people can see stars over Shanghai and Los Angeles these days. It's having a huge impact. All of our lives are changing. We don't like change. Human beings don't really like change, but we've all been forced to change radically. And we're coming to understand that maybe some of those changes are for the better, that actually make life more interesting, more fun.
So when you worked as a self-described economic hitman, you were able to essentially, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn by saying profiting from some of the underlying fragility of the system that we have, which a lot of people may not really see as fragile. Do you agree that coronavirus has exposed that even stable seeming economies are actually far more fragile and in a matter of just a couple of weeks can fall apart very quickly?
It's absolutely exposed that, and it's also exposed the tremendous inequalities that our system is filled with. The racial discrimination, the gender discrimination, all these inequalities are really coming to the surface. So I think the coronavirus is showing us our shadow side, and in fact, the way many governments have reacted to it has shown us our shadow side too, and shown us that the old system isn't working. We don't want to return to normal. We want to create a new normal. That's what we call a life economy.
And so can you talk a little bit about, as specifically as you want, what those changes would be? One of the fundamental realities of the economy we have is that being proactive is fundamentally not encouraged, because proactive just means you're spending money on stuff you might not actually need to spend money on, essentially, right? You're spending money now for something that may happen, but it may not. what are the changes that would need to be made in order to have what you call a life economy, what some might call a more sort of human-centered capitalism, or some other term that would be applied to it?
Well, yeah, David. So a great deal of the book, Touching the Jaguar, centers around the idea that the truth that human reality is molded by human perceptions. I learned that when a shaman saved my life in 1969 deep in the Amazon, but it's also the basis of modern psychotherapy, of quantum physics, of marketing, of advertising, of corporate policy. Our perceptions control our reality. This death economy, what many economists are referring to is a death economy because it's consuming in the short term the resources upon which it depends in the long term. It's exhausting and it's destroying the environment as we know it. And it's based on one perception, and that is that businesses must have the goal of maximizing short-term profits for a few investors, really, regardless of the social and environmental costs. And that's taken us down this very, very dangerous road. So what we really need to change is that perception. We need to touch that jaguar, and I'm touching that jaguar all the time. It's the jaguar that keeps us locked in the fear that change is dangerous. And that, we don't want too much change. But what we need to do is change that goal, that perception of that. And the goal needs to be, instead of maximizing short-term profits, to maximize long-term benefits for humans and the entire and all of nature, the planet.
And part of that, I mean, that this critique. So in the business cycle, it's about what was your quarterly profit, what did you do for the year, what was earnings per share. The political system is also based around this, right? In the sense that if members of Congress are up for re-election every 2 years, if the president's up for re-election every 4, you're essentially constantly campaigning. And this also at a systemic level encourages what can you justify that you did in the last 6 months rather than how did you improve the country for the next 20 or 30 years.
Right. And that's exactly what needs to change. So let's, encourage businesses to pay investors to invest in things that clean up pollution, that regenerate destroyed environments, that recycle, that come up with new technologies. We've gone a long way with wind and solar, but in a way, those are both in their infancy. Let's move beyond that. Let's channel the air into forms of energy. There's so much that we can do. And we've learned how to be creative during this coronavirus. As an example, over 50% of your tax dollars and mine, if you're an American citizen, go to the military in the discretionary budget. And our military is doing some crazy things like building more aircraft carriers and missiles and things that the Russians and Chinese are not focusing on at all. They're focusing on cybernetics and they're focusing on new technologies. Imagine if some of that money that we're currently paying Raytheon and General Dynamics to use to build these systems that are basically obsolete. Instead, we put that money to encouraging these companies and entrepreneurs and other companies to mine all the plastic that's floating around in the oceans and all the oil that's leaked around gas stations all over the world and at oil drilling sites. And there's so much more. There's so many, many things like that we can pay people to do. We're talking about a full employment economy here when we're talking about a life economy. But we're talking about, instead of making those widgets and stuff that you mentioned earlier that people don't really need, and in a way we probably don't even really want, except we're giving the impression, hey, if you don't wear this shirt, nobody's going to want to date you. That kind of thing. There's this impression, there's this perception that's created our reality. We need to create another reality that what we really want to invest in are the things that will make life better for all of us and for future generations.
Right. I mean, my framework I don't necessarily need to label everything, but I think an ideology that pretty well describes my views would be social democracy, which is that there are areas where I'm fine with the market directing resources as long as the market is well regulated and it's a fair market. And the government, as you say, is saying there are some things that are bigger than profit. So, for example, cleaning up the oceans may not be particularly profitable in the way that we would measure it in the short term. But the long-term value of it to humans is such that should be taken outside of the market forces. Is that more or less the ideology you're applying?
It is, David, and I think we have to look at the definition of what's successful statistically. The measurement, as you pointed out, GDP is a standard measurement tool, and it's a lousy one. And I discovered that when I was an economic hitman, that I thought that because I was taught in business school that if you invest a lot of money in infrastructure in poor countries that have resources your corporations want, you use those resources as collateral, that helps everyone because you can show that when you do that, the GDP grows. But I came to see over time that that's really only helping the very wealthy people because GDP is very skewed toward the wealthy. So if you take, for example, the United States, with 3 individuals have as much wealth as half the population of our country. If those 3 individuals made 10% return on their investment last year, and half the population lost 3%, we're still showing growth of GDP of something a little under 5%. So the measuring rods that we're using do not tell us anything about true prosperity in a country. They tell us about the prosperity of the wealthy, the big businesses, and the people who own those big businesses. And so we really need to change that whole way of how we look at what's successful and measure success much more in the long term and how it impacts everybody, not just the big owners of big businesses.
What are some of the metrics you would suggest including? I recently read the Charles Whelan's book, Naked Economics, and there's things I like in it and things I disagree with, but one of the things he talks about is we should, at minimum, if we want to evaluate how an economy is doing, we can include GDP, we should look at unemployment, we should look at inequality, we should look at poverty, we should look at trade balance, although individually none of these metrics tells us everything we need to know. They can start to paint sort of a picture. What do you think of those? What would you add? What would you be looking at?
Well, there's so many things along those lines. I mean, we should be measuring the value of somebody doing housework at home, the woman, man doing housework, taking care of the kids. The value of people making music. You know, you're in Boston. There's a lot of amazing musicians and all over New England that aren't making a living doing it. They got to make a living doing something else, and then in the evenings they go off and play their music. This is a huge value there. Same as writers, artists. There's so many things. Labor should be considered much more valuable than it's considered. Labor of all kinds, our healthcare workers, and on and on and on. There's so many measures. One of the most important ones is that we don't include externalities. So when an oil company drills for oil in a country, let's say Ecuador, where I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and it's been a large part of Ecuador's environment's been destroyed by Texaco, now Chevron, that they don't have to pay for that. That's not included in the price of oil that they charge. They just dump the waste. They don't have to pay for the cleanups or all the people that suffered. But that's true throughout all the businesses. It's not just the oil companies. There's all these externalities. They should be included in the cost. And when you start including them, you see that other things have a great deal more value.
Is that the biggest failing of markets, if you had to pick what it is that they really don't, even though efficient market hypothesis folks tell us that markets do account for externalities, that they really don't, and that's where you need government to step in?
Yeah, any accountant will tell you that the externalities, many of them are not included at all. You know, the people that are used in sweatshops overseas, or now a lot of it's by, you know, the people that answer their telephone calls in other countries. Their health is not paid for. It's not taken into account. If they get sick, they get fired. And
yes,
and that's a terrible system. So yeah, that certainly is a starting point. But I think the most important thing that we all need to understand is that the basis of the system, the assumption, is based on this perception that you must maximize short-term profits regardless of the social and environmental costs. And this means that a CEO is actually given the mandate to do whatever it takes to maximize profits. And that may mean destroying the environment, destroying the resources upon which his company depends in the long run in order to make short-run profits, exploiting labor, corrupting politicians. And now, It means, these companies have learned how to corrupt politicians legally, because as we all know, nobody gets elected to a big public office in the United States without huge amounts of money that basically is generated by corporations one way or another. And these people are offered incredible high-paying jobs as consultants, lobbyists, whatever, when they leave politics. So we've got this system where CEOs are basically forced by the investors, by Wall Street, by their owners, to do whatever it takes to maximize short-term profits. And that's proven to be insanity. It's taken us down this course that's caused so many problems. When you come right down to it, David, the coronavirus, the racial discrimination, climate change, income inequality, species extinction, those are all problems. But they're not the disease. They're not the problem. They're symptoms of the disease. And the disease is it's really a governmental social economic system that we can call a death economy that just plain isn't working anymore. It had worked. It gave us amazing science and medicine and art and so many things, but it's reached its limits. Its time is over. It's time to move into a new system, a life economy.
The book is Touching the Jaguar, now available. We've been speaking with the book's author, John Perkins. John, always great having you on. I so appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, David. And I would just like to point out that the subtitle of the book is Transforming Fear into Action to Change Your Life in the World. And,
yes.
And in the book, there's a whole process that people can go through on a daily basis or a weekly basis for about 10 minutes that guide each individual, whether you're a carpenter or a plumber or a radio show host or a writer like me, that'll take you down this course to transform your life and the world.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show depends on the support of our viewers and listeners, and one way to keep us going is through Patreon, where you can pledge as little as $1 per month or as much as you want at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Great perks and benefits as well. Read about them.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So this is very interesting. I teased this earlier in the show. Donald Trump's daughter-in-law, Lara Trump, was interviewed on Fox News this week, and she was actually asked about the health concerns surrounding Donald Trump after his completely outrageous behavior during the West Point commencement speech that he gave over the weekend. Now, I want to be crystal clear. What's important about this is not so much what Lara Trump says. Obviously, Lara Trump says Trump's fine. Right? That's not surprising. We wouldn't expect her to say anything other than that. What matters here is that the story actually made it onto Fox News. Back in 2016, in all of those bogus Hillary Clinton has Parkinson's type stories, Hillary's unhealthy, Hillary's dying stuff, even now, stories about Joe Biden, and we see Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity sort of allude to Joe Biden's cognitive state. We have not seen any mentions of Donald Trump's obviously odd behavior that could be related to health. We already discussed on the Monday show Trump struggling to drink a glass of water and, sort of having to use his left hand to help himself drink water at West Point. We saw the video of Trump almost being helped down a ramp by a military officer looking incredibly ginger and unstable and frail. Raised a whole new host of questions about Trump's health. So here is Fox anchor Martha McCallum actually asking Lara Trump about health concerns. Take a look.
The hubbub over this.
Well, I think it's sort of sad that nobody focused on what the president actually said at his address there at West Point. It was such a message of unity and togetherness and strength of America and how proud he was of all of those graduates there.
It was beautiful. I listened to the whole thing.
Yeah, it was so nice. Instead, people, Martha, of course, focus on the way he walks down a ramp. This was a ramp that was, had no steps, no handrail. The president had on leather shoes. Of course, he's going to take his time and go down and make sure that
nobody wants to fall down in front of cameras. No, I get it. But just to ask you, straight out, is there anything about the president's health that the American public doesn't know?
No. Absolutely not. It's just fodder for the critics out there to attack him.
So, of course, it's not surprising that Lara Trump says everything's completely fine and there's nothing to see here about Donald Trump's health. That's not really why I'm talking about this. The point is, the fact that this was even on Fox News is huge because it means that the issue of Trump's health is now on the radar of some of these right-wing Trump sycophants who primarily get their news from Fox News and wouldn't ordinarily hear about this story. So understand that were it not for segments like this, there's a huge portion of the country that wouldn't even know anything about Donald Trump's confused speech and limited reading ability, visible confusion, the often dilated pupils while sweating, his strange stance, and all of these other signs that have been topics of concern around the country for years at this point in time. So I'm not really praising Fox News in any kind of broader way, but it's a good thing that the story actually made it on the air, because this is likely the first time that a ton of Trumpist Fox News watchers are even hearing about the fact that there are health questions surrounding Donald Trump. Now, also, just kind of in the vein of fact checking, remember that initially Donald Trump explained the reason that he walked down the ramp so slowly and gingerly was that the ramp was slippery. Donald Trump tweeted over the weekend, quote, "The ramp that I descended after my West Point commencement speech was very long and steep, had no handrail, and most importantly, was very slippery. The last thing I was going to do is fall for the fake news to have fun with. Final 10 feet, I ran down to level ground, momentum." So that was quickly identified as bogus because people just looked at weather reports and video of the event. It had been completely dry and sunny all day, so the ramp was not slippery. Notice that now there's a new explanation from Lara Trump, which is that there was no handrail and there were no steps, and that Trump was wearing leather shoes. The no steps thing is extra funny because by definition, ramps don't have steps. It's like, well, he would have gone down the ramp faster if it had steps. Well, then it wouldn't be a ramp, would it? It would be stairs. So ultimately, what do we make of the ramp incident? I don't know. Here's a side-by-side video for our television audience of Joe Biden and Donald Trump both walking on ramps. The level of mobility is clearly very different. Does this mean anything other than Trump is getting older? Maybe not. The point is we don't know. It could be a sign of a stroke. It could be a sign of really anything. We just don't know. And importantly, none of this is anything to make fun of. Donald Trump is 74 years old. He's obese. It's not shocking that he would have some mobility issues, but the point is the constant dishonesty and attacking others, never answering questions straight up, and increasingly deceptive feeling statements and actions when it comes to his health, which we'll talk about later, including the completely bogus thing from 2019. Remember where he was rushed to Walter Reed Medical Center and we were told, you know what, he just had a few free hours. He decided to get a jump on that 2020 physical. It wasn't believable. And now even some Republican groups are making this a focus. Let's talk about that next. Okay, so in the last 24 hours, the health questions about Donald Trump have appeared, not just on Fox News, as we already talked about, but the health questions around Trump have also become a focus of a new ad from the Republican PAC, Republican Political Action Committee, called the Lincoln Project. Now, we've talked about the Lincoln Project a little bit before. It's a PAC run by some prominent Republicans. This includes George Conway, who, by the way, is the husband of Trump advisor Kellyanne Conway. Steve Schmidt is part of the Lincoln Project, former McCain campaign manager, Rick Wilson, and other prominent Republicans. They are a Republican PAC that realizes Trump is a danger and must be removed. Their ads have been going after Trump harder and harder. And yesterday they released an ad that goes after Donald Trump on the topic of his health. Again, raising questions about Trump's behavior over the weekend at West Point, linking Trump's behavior to the last minute visit to Walter Reed Medical Center in 2019. So let's look at the ad. Let's listen to the ad. Now, some of these elements are visual, like, for example, you'll hear voiceover and they are showing Donald Trump acting bizarrely. So I do recommend watching this online, but you'll get a sense of the story that's being told from the narration. Let's take a look.
Something's wrong with Donald Trump. He's shaky, weak, trouble speaking, trouble walking. So why aren't we talking about this? And why isn't the press covering Trump's secretive midnight run to Walter Reed Medical Center? Why do so many reporters who cover the White House pretend they can't see Trump's decline? The most powerful office in the world needs more than a weak, unfit, shaky president. Trump doesn't have the strength to lead, nor the character to admit it. We're not doctors, but we're not blind. It's time we talk about this. Trump is not well.
So this is really quite well done. Even the details, down to the details, it's very good. At one point when the voiceover says we're not doctors, what you see in the ad is Trump's old Dr. Harold Bornstein on screen. That's the guy that Donald Trump allegedly coerced into writing that bogus letter about how healthy Donald Trump is. So we are now seeing this, I guess we would call it a sort of hashtag movement. Trump is not well is the name of it. And it's going much more mainstream than it ever has. It's happening thanks to right-wing media. It's happening thanks to a Republican political action committee. And to go back to the analysis, this is not about Republicans are now going to be widely concerned about Donald Trump's health. That's not going to happen. The importance of this is that there are large swaths of the American population that don't even know that there's been a conversation about Trump's health happening for 3 years. There's large portions of the electorate that have no idea that dozens of medical experts, both from the neurology field and mental health fields, have been expressing concern about Donald Trump's health for years because they watch Fox News and they only follow Republicans on social media. They don't know about Trump's verbal glitches, his wandering off that time when he came off of Air Force One. His limo was right in front of him. He wandered off, had to be brought back by Secret Service, losing his train of thought, sweating with the dilated pupils while speaking, upper Trump versus downer Trump. They don't know about it. So even hearing about this as a thing on Fox News and through a Republican PAC is introducing it into their awareness. Now, 99% of them won't care. But remember that in 2016, the election came down to 75,000 votes in 3 states. We will mostly win if we get the turnout, but we'll take any help we can get. And if it's a Republican PAC and Fox News asking even some questions about Donald Trump's health, you might convince a few people and we will take it. Now, there are reports about this ad being controversial. For example, there's an article this morning in The Week, which is called New Lincoln Project Ad Controversially Questions Trump's Health. It's not really controversial if you've been following this for years. And there's a debate happening in this article and elsewhere asking whether Trump's health is fair game. Now, one argument is, listen, Trump mocked a disabled reporter. He calls Joe Biden Sleepy Joe and says Joe Biden doesn't even know what he's saying. He is regularly implying Joe Biden is cognitively impaired. So that makes Trump's health fair game. I disagree with that assessment. The reason Trump's health is fair game is because he's the president, and we have reason to believe that he's lying about his health. His medical report lied about his height and weight combination. He allegedly coerced a doctor to write a letter saying Trump would be the healthiest president in history. It's an empirical claim that no doctor could actually make. So I understand the concern from disability rights groups worried that this is bordering on making fun of health issues. That is not what this is about. This is about understanding the critical nature of being president. And when you have a president that, number one, seems unwell, and number two, is dishonest about everything, including his height and weight, we are absolutely right to be concerned. That's really what this is fundamentally about. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. To sort of put a coda on our discussion of Donald Trump's health, here is a nurse who called in. She's delightful, by the way, who says she believes stroke may be the explanation for Trump's trouble drinking water, Trump favoring one side when walking down that ramp at West Point. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
Hi, David. You are absolutely the best.
Thank you.
Just watched your commentary about Trump walking or at the West Point.
Yes.
And I believe he's had a stroke. I'm a nurse. practitioner. I've seen a lot of that. Anyway, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, a bunch of nurses actually wrote to me and they said that the one-sided thing that seemed to be going on with Trump is to them indicative of a stroke. I am not making that claim myself, merely telling you what some nurses have reported to me. We have a great bonus show for you today. We are going to talk about the Trump administration absolutely panicking about the upcoming release of John Bolton's White House memoir. Bolton, of course, one of Trump's former national security advisors, and the Justice Department is now actually trying to take legal action to block the publication of the book. They are scared. They are scared. Boy Scouts of America, not typically the most left-wing organization you can imagine, particularly when it comes to gay rights, is backing Black Lives Matter. We're going to talk about what they're doing and how they're doing it. And lastly, Albuquerque is going to put in place a system where when a 911 call comes in, depending on what the call is about, instead of dispatching armed police, social workers will be dispatched. This is one of the primary recommendations I had in my multiple segments about how to fix police. Very interesting. And we will talk about all of those stories and talk about yesterday's chess tournament, which had over 700 players participate. On the bonus show, get instant access by becoming a member at joinpacman.com or by becoming a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Thanks so much for watching today's episode. Just a reminder, today's sponsor, Blue Chew, is giving you your first shipment completely free. All you have to do is pay $5 shipping. Go to bluechew.com and use the promo code DAVID. I've put a link right underneath this video.